All right, what's up, everyone? Thank you for joining me. I can't believe it's episode 107. This thing's been going on for a while, and that's why I'm getting more and more impromptu with these. Of course, we're very much committed to good presentation for everyone, but it's week in and week out, so I'm just gonna shoot from the hip with these. From the top, I'm gonna apologize for any potential noise you might hear for this video because we've basically got my neighbors doing a party next door, which is very cool. It should be a party atmosphere. It should be enjoyable. So I'm gonna roll with it and try not to go too long with this video. Today is December 21st, 2024. It's the winter solstice. So it actually means something to me this day. It's the shortest day of the year, and the sun is at its lowest point. So for me, this day is about like rock bottom. Like if you think of the cycle of the year as like a cycle of a person's life, this is the bottom. This is as bad as it's ever gonna get. It's as dark as the day is gonna get, and that I've always resonated with that. Not just because I've been somebody who like real life has hit rock bottom a few times, many times. Not just that, but it's a very powerful day concept, the concept of rock bottom, because it's the most potential that you're ever going to have. From here, you can bounce off the floor, and really you're forward. All you can do is improve. Like you're only gonna go up from here. After the darkest night always comes a brighter day, right? So it just happens to be this day as we're doing this show. Now, how this episode came about, which of course you can find on the One Great Work Network, which you can find on my website truthandlaw.com and anywhere where I am not banned. The episode's going to be about the privatization of taxes. It's going to be about the combination of the public and private sector as the new hybrid form of authority. And really it's not new, it's old, it's always been this way, but it goes undetected. But how did it come about? Well, I was at work and I was speaking with the tile guy, and he brought up the parking meters. He brought up the parking. Of course, we're doing some work in the heart of the city over there, and the parking is really bad there. I don't mean to stress it all the time, but I live in Chicago. This is my life, and it comes up again and again. And he is actually the one that told me, hey, you know where all that money's going to? Saudi Arabia. And I said, what? So then I had to research what he's talking about, and lo and behold, it is something to talk about, and it is Saudi Arabia. So let's go straight to it. Now, privatization of taxes, what I'm calling it, is one of the more advanced weapons in this war against freedom. I always feel like the freedom movement is a step behind, and this is one of those things, even though it's not like a new thing, but the understanding of it's really lacking. And what it is, it's the Hegelian dialectic at its absolute deadliest. I know we all know about how polarized everything is, about how people are split. This, again, great topic. I can just dive in, give my perspective, and talk about things that are not talked about. Before we even get into it, I'm going to try to keep the video short, but I can already see it's going to be like 40 minutes at least. So the main point is, while yes, the looters and robbers in this scenario are private corporations, right? They are businesses, corporations. I'm aware of the corporate structure being evil, but none of it would happen without the public federal law stopping people from being able to use appropriate force to stop them, to stop the looters, to stop the robbers. So there's a hybrid here. It's public and private. In this scenario with the parking meters, the companies that own the parking meters are private companies. It is a total business exploitation type of thing. But not only is that a problem, and these people are greedy and predatory, the problem is, on the other hand, if you try not to pay them their basically their mafia ransom, which is what a parking ticket is, if you don't do that, then the public side is going to step in and take your vehicle, and that's all because of government. Now, the problem is not really either of these, public or private arms, the two heads on this control system. Neither of them are the problem. The problem is that people are stopped from exercising their ability to stop them, and I mean kill them. I mean kill, like limb by limb, chop them down, like limb by limb, we ever cut them down. Like, if you've heard that song, that's exactly what it is. It's a limb by limb chopping them down, because that's what we're talking about when it comes to somebody making a claim on your property. Because if you don't draw the line there, then they go further, and then they go further, and then they go further. And the longer you let injustice go unanswered, the more actually the abuser becomes justified, because they can say, oh, well, why didn't you say anything? You didn't say anything last time. That's how it goes, okay? Now, limb by limb chop them down is what would happen to bad people if they weren't the ones in charge. That's what the world is. It's these people are in charge. They are the ones in the institutions. Not all of them, but at the top they are. And it's the biggest foolishness. It's the biggest foolishness in the world. People think that bad people would take over the world if it wasn't for authority groups, if it wasn't for control systems, if it wasn't for institutions. No. Those institutions and groups are how the bad people took over. The bad people are in control right now. So don't give me nothing about what would happen if not for this. All of that stuff is actually happening. Everything bad that you can imagine that may happen, you know about that because it has actually happened historically and will continue to happen. It's all done by governments, okay? I know there's here and there, you got the guy that is going to hold his family in the basement. And here and there, this guy's going to chop somebody and dismember them and disembowel them. That stuff happens. It is very small percentage. It is minuscule. And very often, those people, those serial killers, they have ties to, of course, institutions, their teachers, their lawyers, their respected people in the community, because that allows them to do their crimes undetected, okay, behind closed doors. It is the same way on a mass scale as it is on an individual scale. Now, that's just my little intro. I'm getting very much in the Christmas spirit of this thing. I'm now, where's the party noises when you need them? It's supposed to be an enjoyable atmosphere, but putting this show together has really turned the injustice up in my heart, so that's what I'll express. I'm actually having a lovely time. I hope everybody has a lovely Christmas and all that stuff, right? But we're gonna call things how they are. And first, I'll give a background perspective. That was my little intro, but now we need to understand something before we get into the actual material that we're going to read. Okay, we're going to read an article. But before, I want to kind of lay out the way I see it. Life is a dance between progress and stagnation. Like, you're only ever doing one of those two things, and that is kind of the life cycle. Your life is a series of really times of progress, of optimism, like especially triumphs, singular events, and then, or failures, and then stagnation, periods of stagnation where there's resistance to change. So you got wonderful breakthroughs, you got being in the zone, you've got all this stuff, you've got the desire to get things accomplished, right? You want these things, and then you get these things, or you don't get these things, and along the way inertia sets in, and then habits set in. If you get something, then you want to hold on to it. So it's always this tug, this ebb and flow between progress and stagnation. If we extrapolate that parallel to history, we see it totally play out one-to-one. We see throughout human history the same thing. It's an ebb and flow between progress and stagnation. And when it comes, and I mean that in the quality of life, the type of government, right? The type of lifestyle, how much affluence there is, right? If there's hunger, if there's conflict, if there are disasters, it's all this ebb and flow. And you can track the different time periods, the periods throughout history, like the classical era, the Greeks and the Romans. Now, of course, you had Caesar and everything. So, of course, you had centralized control, of course, right? But these time periods that we read about in the history books, they were a time of, at least for many people, of knowledge, of ideas, and there was actually They're very much like you call this a golden age. That we think of these areas, these eras, time periods where there was a lot of progress, and there was. Then the empire falls, right? This happens, that happens. The empire deteriorates. Rome falls. Then you have the Dark Ages, the medieval times. Of course, this is known as a time of political and religious repression. And that's what happens, right? Once you have a lot of that optimism, a lot of that knowledge get forgotten, books are burned, then you have a life that is really backwards. Now, it may seem that way with the medieval period, but then at the same time, you think of these peasants at these times, and they were really living a very simple lifestyle, but them not being part of the royalty, them being so clearly peasants, and living on somebody's land and being under their control, that clarity, right? That clarity of that situation that they're living in. Those peasants among themselves actually could live a very free lifestyle. They could actually have their own language, their own culture, their own understanding, and actually be very happy and fulfilled. So it's not to paint with a broad brush all these time periods, but the metaphor holds true, because then you have the Renaissance period, where you have this rebirth of knowledge, of human optimism, right? The idea of a human being being something that has value, has choice, has free will. You have all this art, you have all this music come about, and you kind of have a rebuilding of really civilization, of a life that is not just toil and working the fields, but infinite possibilities, right? So then you have the Renaissance. Then, of course, that falls. Then you have the ebb and flow. You can talk about the witch trials. You can, talk about a lot of things like the Reformation. And then anytime there's a little bit of freedom, there's always a pullback to get the people back into the shackles. And then again, you would have the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, right? We really think of this as we're still in this era. It was our most recent kind of golden age era where, really this is sanitation, right? This is where your life expectancy shot up. It was just way healthier to be a human being, because now you can produce enough food, you can have running water. Really, that's the main thing that changed life, from having to worry about disease and all this. And being just a slave to population density. It's because you got running water, you got plumbing, you've got sanitation. Industrial Revolution, you can mass produce all of these things. Now, we produced a lot of things we don't need and a lot of bullshit and garbage, but the point is, it's allowed us to work together with nature and use it to our advantage, as opposed to being a slave to nature. And when this winter hits, this December 21st, just a few hundred years ago, this is a time where you had to hope to survive it, because we did not have as much potential and power compared to the infinite power of nature and her elements. So there's that, but really we're not in the time period of the Enlightenment or the fruits of it, or the Industrial Revolution and the fruits of that. We're in the time period of the valley right now, the descent. We're going away from that, and in this modern time, we're in a collectivist age where all of these things, we're turning our back on them, and there's actually it masks as progress, but it's actually stagnation. We are in a time of stagnation, and the best way to see that is just look at the parking meters, look at the way all the cars are gray, look at the way all the phones are black. They're the same shape. The people more or less look the same, talk the same. Classic example of stagnation, okay? It's just got a different flavor of it because we're in a different time period. But when we talk about tyranny versus freedom, we talk about politics, we talk about war, all the things we talk about on This Week in Tyranny, we have to remember that these are secondary concepts and conditions. These are not things that actually exist in nature. Like, tyranny doesn't exist. There's no such thing as tyranny. We create it as human beings. So, it exists because we made it. Secondarily, Nature didn't create tyranny or enslavement. No animal in the wild or no system in the wild knows of that. That's us. But it does exist because we have created a reflection of a combination of principles. So it's like the mRNA of the genetic code that is the actual fabric of the universe, and that is principles of nature. That would be your actual DNA. Like the Hermetic principles, just laws of physics, the cycles of nature, that would be like the actual DNA. Now, we take that and we process it, we make a copy of it, and then we live in the reality that we create from the input that we took. We put that input, we put that combination of nature's principles, and then we get the result. Like the messenger RNA. That's what we've done. But the original source code is reality. So before I even get into anything, I want to make the point that the fundamental polarity of life itself and the cycle of life is motion and stagnation. Those are the only two things. And really it's forward motion. But then it gets to be actually a bit of a complicated conversation whether there is such a thing as backward motion. Like, is backward motion even a thing? So, I was writing that a couple hours ago, and then I thought I'd save it for a video. So I'm doing a supplementary video to this one. It'll probably be out a couple days after this, maybe be out at the same time. It'll be in Inreflections, part 4. But all that to say this. We've been in a time of stagnation for like a couple decades now, like approaching it, settling into it for decades. And this means that life is going to be more controlled, it's going to be more synthetic, it's going to be more lifeless. Everybody can kind of feel the good old times slipping. Everybody can feel that life is different. Everybody points to something else as a cause of that, right? Of course, there's a conflict and a lack of understanding of what is happening. It's like two people in a boat, and then there's water coming in, and each of them are blaming the other for making the hole. It's like two people in a car saying, "What did you do? Why isn't the car working?" And somebody cut your battery lines, your brake lines, right? Not knowing the cause of the issue. That's exactly the boat that we're in. So, but we're actually at a point now where it is like widely recognized that there is corruption and oppression. It's kind of an interesting time because you're hearing talk about change and progress and revolution even a lot more, but people are further apart than ever from agreeing on how that is done. So in 2020, it seemed like a lot of conservatives were onto it. It seemed to be clear, like the enemy is globalism, right? It seemed obvious because we got locked down. They were saying stuff that it has nothing to do with reality. So it seemed obvious. But now 4 or 5 years later, now it's kind of shifted. It's not so clear, especially now with Donald Trump being sent to take over the presidency. It's gotten a lot more murky. Who is our enemy now? Is the enemy AI or not? Because Elon Musk seems to be on this side, but he's all about that. And now it seems like the sentiment is that anything outside of the United States is the enemy, right? Like China, immigrants, right? Like these are the people. China's the one bringing in fentanyl in Mexico somehow, right? It's still the World Economic Forum. It's still globalism. Israel, not so much, right? So it's gotten very complicated. Are we pro or against apartheid? Because is this a race thing now, right? Like, does it matter what culture they are, right? Is Islam the enemy, or is foreign occupation the enemy in a very apartheid way? Is Zionism the enemy or no? Because that's anti-American, right? Just like Chinese communism, but somehow that's not clear, right? And in the meantime, we've had this other camp come up, the other side now, slowly becoming more mobilized. Like, how are they getting mobilized? Well, constant training and a battery in the back. So education does it here, like, college. Social media does a little bit there. The celebrities that people listen to, right? We're talking about the left-wing side. We're talking about young people. We're talking about women. We're talking about minorities. This is kind of this camp, right? Social justice stuff on the news, blatant corruption on the news. I mean, these police shootings that I've seen over the past couple years, they've been horrific. It's been crazy that it's been so obvious. So, no wonder people are going to get upset about that. And then at the same time, with inflation being what it is, and money itself seeming more and more like an oppressor in itself. Well, all those factors, you've got now a huge number of people who sees business itself, the profit motive itself, the kind of idea of America as a beacon of free market and economic power, this idea of private enterprise as being corrupt inherently. That's the other wing now. Both are confused. And that's what this article is, okay? That's a long road to make that point. And I just did 2 episodes about Luigi Mangione, about this guy that killed Brian Thompson, the CEO of a health insurance company. And that's it again. You see the dialectic right there. The dialectic is the activists, the revolutionaries, like the people that are ready to take forceful action, right? They're the ones who are ready to go limb by limb, chop them down. They unfortunately see selfishness as the enemy. And now, on the other hand, you got the people who see reality for what it is, which is a place where not everyone is ready to hold hands. Okay? People have to be free to make mistakes, and they have to even be free to destroy themselves potentially. That is reality, okay? The reality is we cannot feed anyone by forcing them, by forcing us to share. You can't force sharing. So people who get how the world works, people who've worked in business and they're working to establish their place. They deal in the very real world, the construction workers, the people who are very much settled down, involved, right? They got a family. They're just trying to chill. They get how the world works. They're not the activists, unfortunately. These are not the revolutionaries. They're not action takers, for the most part, right? These are the 2 camps. And I'll talk more about this in that video that I'm going to make with this, is that there are 4 kinds of people in the world, really, based on 2 qualities and whether you like them or not. And we've been split. So it's either you're a revolutionary or you're not, meaning an action taker, and then either you're a capitalist or you're not, meaning someone who understands the justice principle, right? That you get what you earn, the property principle of private property, right? And you got either you have this or you don't, and then you have 4 combinations of those. Now this article, it's just yet another person, like the environmental activists, like the volunteers, like the Luigi Mangiones, anybody who feels the spirit of action, correctly so, they feel it, but not in the correct direction. So either we got the action or we got the direction. We need both together. These people are like a little boy who wants to help cook, and he's in the kitchen, and he just wants to help cook. He's doing the right thing, but he spills all the ingredients. He makes a mess, and he makes it impossible for the cooking to ever get done. That is somebody who is a revolutionary, but not a capitalist. And with that, I'll start this article by Donald Cohen. A story I've been telling over and over again while on the road for my book, The Privatization of Everything, is the notorious and disastrous Chicago parking meters privatization deal from 2008. Somehow, it just got even worse. That's what he said. Now, since he references himself, he references his book, it's only right we investigate him, right? So, Donald Cohen, this author of this article, he's not just a guy that writes articles for this website. In the Public Interest is the name of the website. He's not just a guy on there. He's the executive director. Okay, this is the main guy of this website, of this organization. When you investigate this website, you see that the central theme is anti-private company exploitation. It's a lot about privatization, meaning that, something that is supposed to be public, like this is what colonialization is. This is what happened in Latin America, right? Instead of those people having something to produce and to have their own, they now sold the land, sold the rights to a company that is going to work those people to death, be brutal to them, extract all the profits, and leave those people with nothing, crumbs on the table. This is why you have a lot of people who correctly want the end of colonialism, and we want abolitionism. We're against all types of slavery. Unfortunately, they've bought the Fidel Castros, the Che Guevaras. It is this even the great, the better leaders of Africa and South America, unfortunately, had these socialist leanings, because on one hand they're trying to help their people, right? They're doing the correct thing, but now without these principles, they've been lost over time. Are we sticking to the principles of justice? Are we actually earning what is ours? Okay, behind the same principles that at least are espoused in the Declaration of Independence, at least these Enlightenment classical principles that have been recycled throughout time. And that is, again, the Renaissance, the classical concept of human life as being inherently valuable, and whatever you produce, you get to fucking keep. Nobody takes your shit. That's it. So this website, in the public interest, is against that. It's that there's a collective interest, and that somehow this group should worry about the group well-being and welfare. Now, if you know anything about me, you know where this is going. I'm talking about socialism. And actually, though, Donald Cohen, this guy, he represents what I would call the elite socialists. Not elite as in ruling class, but like the most enlightened. These are the people who have actually reasonable, logical arguments. Okay, which I do not run from. Again, I resonate with a lot of these people, because at least they have the spirit of action. They want to do the right thing. They see somebody get beat up in the street, they go, what the fuck? They go, this cannot continue. As opposed to just looking the way a lot of so-called, patriots and pro-America people do and say, oh, they probably deserve that. People look at me in the city of Chicago that had nothing to do with voting. I've never voted in my life. I never will. They look at me living here and say, or anybody living here and say, oh, that's what they get for voting Democrat, right? Gun laws. Like, there's actual injustice going on. And somebody will look there in Arkansas or South Dakota or wherever they're from and say, oh, that they get what they deserve, right? Then they say you get what you deserve. So, I'm making enemies everywhere, but I'm just telling the truth. This guy, Donald Cohen, to talk about him more, he's a founding member of Power Switch Action. It's just one of these things he had in his bio. Power Switch Action is a national community of organizers, strategists, and leaders forging multiracial feminist democracy and economies in our cities and towns. And they actually have a section called Our Long-Term Agenda. It's not too often that I read things like this that are, I find it as like batshit crazy that you would, like, just because something is multiracial and feminist, that is there's like a badge of honor, like that makes it true somehow. And they actually have Our Long-Term Agenda, and it's all this stuff. You don't see a single man there anywhere, right? And I always find it so interesting that all of these movements that are so pro women and pro anything other than white men, they're led by white men. And if that doesn't scream Israel to you, I don't know what does, because you trace all of this stuff. You trace all of the funding to a lot of this third wave feminism and a lot of the transgender ideology. Why has it always got the seal of Solomon on it with blue and white? I just don't know. But Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah to everybody, because that's just the way it goes. And if that wasn't enough, we're going to read an Amazon review of his book that he is so proud of, called The Privatization of Everything, which I'm not going to read, but I think it's fair to say I got a good idea of what is in there, but we're going to read a review, right? Someone says, the book exposes with incredible detail and acuity the market-driven, anti-government ideology that now pervades every corner of our society and offers a rousing defense of public goods as essential to our collective well-being. And I think, what type of central authority, socialist wrote this? And this is by Astra Taylor, author of Democracy May Not Exist, but We'll Miss It When It's Gone. And I really was just scrolling through reviews to see what people were saying. And I know Astra Taylor. I've heard her talk about unschooling and talk about how the central authority of school is so damaging to children. And, she left school. She actually admitted that she went back to an Ivy League school because she felt that kind of urge to be part of a crowd. But then, of course, giving this great presentation about not doing that and how to raise children without having this herd mentality. And I think, damn, Miss Taylor, what the fuck happened to you? This is the exact opposite of what unschooling is, but she's got all the key words. She actually says it exposes anti-government ideology, and I like that. I like that you call things as they are. Is that this is pro-government. This is a whole section of pro-government activists. I've never heard it before, And she says that public goods as essential, meaning socialism. It's you can't have private goods because they're not for the people. You want these things to be for the people. So you're talking about socialism and collective well-being, more of the same. But we're going to go back to the article now. New numbers are out. In this past year, Chicago lost another $136.2 million in potential revenue. That's how much in parking fees went to the group of global investors who operate the meters. Okay, these are the people that the tile guy was referring to, and I have to say, he's on point. They have the correct information. Foreign investors, some of which are Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, whatever it may be. Now, when I hear this, they lament, right? Donald Cohen, who wrote this article, that Chicago could have had $136 million of that. That's how much those parking meters made. I contributed to that fund a bit, of course. And I think 136 million in potential revenue, meaning, okay, that's how much people paid for parking. I see it as really wild and ballsy to even call it potential revenue in an article because it's forced. Okay, this isn't revenue, this is loot. It's taken by force, this stuff. It's like it would be the same thing as like looking at a women's prison or a girl's private school. And you're looking at that and you're saying, this is like 136 nights of pussy. Because that's exactly the same thing. Like, you're entitled to something without any agreement or contract or consent, right? And that analogy should be shocking. But what's even more shocking is how far we are from seeing that parallel. That's a one-to-one parallel. Because it is to one person it's a commodity, but it's taken by force. You don't even get to think of it as a resource because it requires that person's cooperation. If you have a private parking lot, you can charge people parking like we do over in Green Bay, Wisconsin, in front of Lambeau Field. People let you park on their yard and you give them $20. Perfectly fine now. Public road, paid for by public funds, and you have parking on top of it. Who owns the road? How can the government own the road? No such thing. Now, okay, we're going to go back to the article, actually. I don't want to get ahead of myself. As you recall, Chicago, like all cities, was struggling financially because of the Great Recession. Out of desperation, the city rushed to take a $1.15 billion offer from private investors, including some from as far away as Abu Dhabi, in exchange for control of 36,000 parking meters for 75 years. Now, wait a minute. Does anybody think about who created these conditions? What does that sentence even mean? And we all take that for granted. The city was struggling financially because of the Great Recession. Like, what does it mean when we say America's in debt? It just means the government spends more money than it brings in somehow. They just voted in another budget bill this week to avoid a government shutdown. It's the same thing every week. It's such a joke. I'm like, oh my god, just let it shut down, please. But I won't even get into that. It's not. But it exposes, like, it shows the whole point. This is the way the control system works: is that it's operating under a public-private hybrid structure. The governments are going to borrow money from the banking families. That's who the banks are, right? Like, how are they even in a financial crisis? How could a whole country be indebted? It's because they're borrowing from these banking families. Central banks, how you call them, they're not actually central, meaning they're not official. They're just called that. They're private entities. The Federal Reserve is private. All these banks are, I don't care if it's called the European Central Bank and it's all like very official. It's private. They're taking it away from the government. Okay? And that's how it works, because to rein in the freedom of the people, you need to be constantly taking money from them. Otherwise, if people have enough money, then that means they have enough time, they have enough control over their health, their life, that they will develop these ideals like the Renaissance, Enlightenment ideals, and they will be open to the growth of ideas, and they will have the ability to engage in progress and forward motion. Okay? Instead, you want people heading towards less and less and less. Okay, so you need to constantly take the money from them, and that is why the debt is there. National debt, again, is not real. It always goes back to the same thing. Like, why is America even in debt? Well, it was the wars, the French-Indian Wars. There was some war 200 years ago, or even the Revolutionary War. And the story always goes that we borrowed money because we needed to fight this war. And then we've had that debt, and we could never pay it back since, because there's interest always on top of interest. It was never going to work. No one ever talks about these wars were caused by central banks in the first place. That's for one. So there was behind the scenes shifting of power and deals. No one talks about that. No one also talks about, second, no one ever had to really borrow that money. That war could have been fought without that money. And in the end, it wasn't people making the decision to borrow that money. It was government behind the backs of the people. I don't care what the history books say. That's how this stuff happens. What's the last time you voted to go to war? And anything like that could have been actually waged without foreign help. But no one questions that kind of stuff. It's just we needed it for the war, and that's it. And also, third, even if a country borrows because it needs money for a war or whatever, you could just not pay back. Because there is no such thing as usury in nature, again. Okay, these are secondary things that are not actually in existence. We don't actually have to hold to these things as natural laws. If you borrow money and have to pay back an extra 15%, you could pay it back. That's up to you, but you don't have to. The only thing you're morally obligated to do is just pay back the original debt. It's an equation. It just has to balance out. But this is all beside the point, because it's really not, I know it's not about logic or actual reality, this financial system. The whole point of this is that those who want human stagnation, they have to have a bleeding hole. They have to have a wound constantly open. They have to have a hole to throw money in, because otherwise none of the money is lost, so you don't take the people's energy. You need money constantly being extracted from the populace. And that's the point of that. And people just don't have a long view of history. So no one can trace the nature of control to that public-private hybrid. It's so easy to get stuck in, oh my God, government's the enemy, or corporations are the enemy. It's a lot more nuanced, okay? Now we're reading an article currently by someone who sees the money extracted from the people, right? Correctly sees that as being an injustice. But then he thinks that if it's domestically extracted and kept there, as opposed to being extracted, overseas, abroad, then that money will somehow be given back to the people by their government. And these people are fucking fools. This is so foolish. It's like people who have never been scammed before. Like, you're not getting your money back. You never get your money back. You only give your money to people you trust, people who you've personally chosen to associate with. These are people you didn't choose to associate with, and they get your money through shady behaviors, and somehow you trust them to give it back to you. Why? Back to the article. Once the ink was dry, the deal's finer details came into focus. The city's inspector general concluded that the meters had been sold off $1 billion under their value. And because the investors demanded a healthy return on their investment, parking rates shot up to some of the nation's highest. And that surprises nobody. It's a classic scam. It used to be 25 cents. But if you're scamming, that's how you do it. You just need your hooks in, you gain the leverage, and then you hike that shit up to $2 or $4 an hour, which is where we are now. No one should have been surprised by that. Back to the article. Since then, the investors have made out like bandits. By 2019, they had made their initial investment plus $500 million in profit on the top. Combined with 2 other privatization deals made around the same time, 4 parking garages and the Chicago Skyway Bridge, the parking meters have sucked billions from Chicago's budget. Chicago today would have between $3 and $4 billion more than it has from these 3 deals together. Clint Krislov, director of the IIT Chicago-Kent Center for Open Government Law Clinic, told the Chicago Sun-Times. Krislov has also said that the parking meters contract pales by comparison to the horrendous Skyway deal. Now back to Donald Cohen. As I told Paul Rosenberg for Salon earlier this year, it was an incredibly stupid way to borrow money on the city's future revenues. But what I really tried to get across when I tell the story is the extra stupid and anti-democratic part. And me now, I'm saying what's really anti-democratic is that you pay $831 to register a vehicle, and you're going to get fined if you don't have insurance. And then when you park on a public street maintained by public funds, you can have somebody write you up. And then when they do, it's not Abu Dhabi or any foreign investors that arrest you. It's your fucking government that does it to you. Your own people do it to you. It's no fucking sheik, right? It's no Arabian prince, because they would get chopped down limb by limb if they did some shit like that. But instead, it's our government, right? It's our public interest that does it, right? So again, people are not directing their displeasure with the source of it, okay? At least aim in the general area, but you guys are aiming way in the other direction. Let's finish this article now. Get this, he says. This contract is written to make it harder and much more expensive for the city to introduce transit alternatives like bus or bike lanes. The city essentially has to buy back parking spots to cover revenue that could have been generated over the life of the 75-year contract. When have you ever heard of a 75-year contract? You know, I don't even know if the original covenant with the Hebrews was 75 years. But it's interesting that these bike lanes even cost the city money, and I'm sure it does. It costs them to build that, and not only does it cost the drivers, it costs everything, all of the money that is thrown out. And I get that the local government is hamstrung. It's just like police. Like, I'm aware that a lot of cops are reasonable people, and them now in the climate of the last few years, with all the George Floyd stuff and all these shootings that I've mentioned, which were horrible, they now have to do all this paperwork in the city of Chicago. They have all the potential lawsuits. They can't touch somebody or they get a lawsuit, right? All of these things. They're people talk shit to them in the streets. That always amuses me, because I think you deserve that. But you know, at the same time, they're not able to, like, you know, all these domestic arguments, right? Say there's there's a child there being endangered, not being fed, while, you know, you have 2 people fighting with each other, the parents of the child, right? Or a boyfriend and a woman. these cops now don't want to even get involved to help the child because of how much of a hassle it is. So I get that there are people that work within government, and then there's normal people. They could even be in insurance companies or corporations, whatever it is. And I get that this is bad, that this is negative, that this is happening to them. And it's harder for good people in poisonous institutions to limit the extent of the poison. I get that. I get this part. But the point is that this is all done by purpose anyway. So don't vote. Don't support the military. Don't support police. If there is a fucking hierarchy, then the top of the hierarchy has already betrayed you. It's simple. Chop them, again, cut them down limb by limb. That we don't need these institutions. He says, according to the new numbers, in the 12 years since the contract was signed, Chicago has bought back parking spots from the investors to the tune of $78.8 million. And who knows how many city planners have wanted to remove parking meters? Question mark. A few years after the deal was signed, Chicago area transportation planners told sociologist Stephanie Farmer that the contract is tying their hands in efforts to build environmentally sustainable modes of transportation. Climate change has only sped up since. Now here is another red herring, right? Another dialectic, right? Where it seems like, oh my God, we need to get rid of these parking meters. Everyone agrees, I agree. So we can build the bike lanes. So you've actually you've done the same shit. You've really hit people where it really hurts. Okay? For the workhorse, the lifeline of the city is now being taken away. Either way, the people are losing money. It takes them more time to get to places, right? It costs them more in every direction. I don't want to get into that, okay? I'm going to move on. When they get rid of these parking meters, if they ever get rid of them, what's going to replace them will be another step towards human stagnation and not human progress. That's the thing. It's not that it costs you more money per se. It's going to cost you your life, your ability to progress. It's going to tie down your possibilities. Back to the article. That is the main reason why privatization is so dangerous. It erodes democracy. The principle that each and every one of us has an equal voice in our community. It gives too much power to banks, investors, and corporations, who have fundamentally different goals than public institutions. They exist to make a profit, not to promote equity, maintain a democratic society, or limit carbon emissions. I can barely get through that. Of course, this is bullshit. What having an equal voice in your community actually means is that your interests are just as valuable as anybody else's. And it doesn't matter what your goals are. And that's capitalism. What matters here is banks, investors, corporations, none of them, not one of them, ever in history has ever oppressed anybody without the help of government. It's government that makes it possible for monopolies to occur, for gangs to be controlling them. Again, it's the public-private hybrid. If you took away government, you would see there wouldn't be all this oppression, because there are so many more peaceful people in the world, and if these people could really do all this crime in broad day, they get chopped down limb by limb. Okay, now this is the end of the article, for real. That is why the things we all rely on should be available to everyone, like water or K-12 education, or how we get around, roads, bridges, buses, trains, are public goods and must stay that way. I'm going to repeat it. That's why the things we all rely on and should be available to everyone are public goods and must stay that way. Guess what? I agree. These things should be available to everyone. Available means having access to. And having access to that means anyone has the access, the ability to seek these resources, but not the right to have them provided and spoon-fed to you by anybody. That's justice. That's equality. That's equity. Not tilting the tables and having this whole thing with the haves and have-nots. You don't need to concern yourself with that. All you need to do is do away with the protection of the so-called law, the lawyers, the unions, and all kinds of different gangs. All kinds of them. All the unions, associations, federal agencies, governments, all of these groups that ensure that access to resources is limited to those that play along with the agenda. These are your enemies. It's all of these groups that make sure that the gangsters and the looters and the thieves are the ones who have the upper hand. It's not selfishness. It's not the profit greed that does it. It is the selfishness and greed for profit plus the belief in authority. And that ensures that everybody in this world, they're serving the human stagnation instead of serving the human progress. Simple and plain. And I'm gonna go straight from that and do my video about that. We're gonna talk about human progress. We're gonna talk about stagnation, and if there is such a thing as backward motion, worse than stagnation. So join me there if you'd like. Have a Merry Christmas if you'd like. And join me again if you'd like on next week in This Week in Tyranny. And remember, limb by limb we have to cut them down. That's the motto, okay? Limb by limb. Good night.